So my name is David Guest. I'm a solution architect and technology evangelist with Third Space, and today I'm going to be taking you through information protection. It seems to be something we do on about an annual basis. August last year we did updates to Azure information protection. This hopefully would be a little bit more in depth. We've got a bit longer to go at, given that we've got a 45-minute webinar rather than the normal half an hour. So what we're talking about, well, first of all, why we need information protection, what it is around compliance, regulation, in bit about insider risk that we'll be coping with right at the end. We're looking at sensitive information types, everything from national insurance number and driving licenses through to communicable diseases, which is one of the things that's in there. We're going to be talking about the MIP capabilities. We're also going to show you how you can improve the visibility of your use of sensitivity labels and other things. And we'll be talking about hybrid environments, so how to get information out of Box and Dropbox and other things as well. So why do we need to protect information? It's a bit of a daft question, really, because we all know that some information needs to be protected. Now, in some cases, that could be things like HR information, payroll information, but we can summarize it reasonably well. Intellectual property, personally identifiable information, things along those lines, future plans for an organization, and Grand's famous pie recipe. Well, probably not really Grand's famous pie recipe, unless, of course, the organization is planning to sell it to a baker's nearby. But I put that in because it helps us to realize that it's not just about corporate data. It could be around solutions. It could be around things that you know from other organizations. One of the things we are sure of, though, is that the data regulations are increasing on a regular basis. Around the world, there are new regulations coming in that you have to cope with, whether you're dealing with organizations within an area, or in fact just employing people who might exist or have clients that might exist in those areas. GDPR, for example, doesn't really affect organizations in the US, unless, of course, they're dealing with clients who are in Europe, in which case it does apply. So we don't need to be aware just of the regulations that apply to where we are, but they also need to apply based on the clients that we're dealing with. The regulations are increasing very, very regularly. GDPR came in 2016, and we already know that because of Brexit, we're going to be changing what we're doing with GDPR, and the UK government has already said it's expecting to enhance the regulation rather than remove bits of regulation. But when we talk about how we're dealing with these, how we actually start categorizing things, then we need to think about the document sensitivity. Can we easily define that classification? Well, we know from the poll that we did that a third of you are only starting to define or really don't understand what we can do with these labels. What do we mean by public, private, internal, classified, secret, sensitive, official sensitive, top secret, bigoted? There are so many different phrases that we use to actually describe information. Do your users actually understand that, or are they confused by the options? When we start to talk about this document sensitivity, which is really around what's inside the document, we need to start off by trusting the user. The user knows that they're typing a document which is going to be marketing collateral, or they're typing a document which is specifically HR process or policy, or maybe they're typing up an HR document that's approving somebody's promotion and pay rise. All of those have different sensitivities associated with them and should have different labels attached. But the user knows what they are, and therefore the user is the person who's best positioned to decide which sensitivity should be applied. Now, we can help them with this. So, for example, if we see a piece of text in a Word document or a spreadsheet, which is 2 alpha characters, followed by 6 numeric characters, followed by a single alpha character, that's probably a national insurance number. And if you're putting a national insurance number into a document, it's probably going to be private or classified, or maybe HR. But it could be a policy document which is published to everybody in an organization that says, when you put a national insurance number, for example, and you put that into a document, well, that document isn't a national insurance number type document. It's not personally identifiable information, but it will probably trigger a rule that says it should be. So making sure the user has that ability to say, actually, I know what this is, and apply it makes a huge amount of sense. Well, one of the things that we've struggled with over the past 5 years, 7 years, however long we've been looking at this, is actually to make sure that the labeling we're using can be consistent across all of the platforms that we're using. And a label is a simple way of a user to classify and potentially protect their document. But we all use different clients. We all have access to mobile devices, iPhones, Androids, iPads, Android tablets, Windows machines, Chromebooks, browsers based on some other type of device. And we need to make sure we have a way of adding these labels across all of those devices. And until now, that has been challenging. Today, though, we can use Office 365 installed on Macintoshes, on iOS and iPadOS devices, on Android devices, on Windows devices, and have them all exhibit the same icons and labels that we can attach to our documents. The screenshot here actually shows a Mac where we can apply the specific labels of non-business, public, general, confidential, and highly confidential. And in this case, the document has been set as highly confidential. Those labels, that configuration that we're doing, is set in one place, and it's set within the compliancy blade within the Azure portals. So one place where we set the label, and then multiple places where we can select that same label. It becomes consistent, but we then need to make sure that we're actually doing it in the right and controlled way. So here, for instance, is a way of doing it inside of Office on Windows by using the AIP client. Now, we don't have to put the AIP client onto a device, but it's probably a good idea because it gives the user a little bit more flexibility. You can see here, and I'm using a Windows device now rather than the Mac, that we have an extra bar. And this bar sits above the document and allows us very, very simply to click and select the label we want. So it's not go to sensitivity and choose something, it's something that's very obvious to the user. And we can select from non-business, public, general. Well, obviously these are my demonstration ones, but they could be set very easily in your environment to match your labeling, classification, and sensitivity environment. Once we've actually selected it, it becomes apparent what it is, and we'll talk a bit more about that later on when we bring in the ideas of protection. One thing that Microsoft 365 does do is use the same phrase, label, for different things. When is a label not a label? Well, it depends. They're all labels. Retention and deletion labels, which can be attached to a file inside SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Teams, allow us to control whether a file can be deleted, whether it can be removed from a store. Quite often you could have a client or a contract that says files must be held in the environment for 5 years, 7 years, or whatever is appropriate for that specific contract. Adding a retention label to a document will ensure that it stays around for that period. That is a different type of label to a sensitivity label. The sensitivity labels, which we set when we create the document, tell us what we should be doing with that document and the type of file it is, whether it's confidential, classified, or PII. The two do not work together. So setting something as a classification at one level does not force a retention label at the same level. They are discrete, separate, and are managed separately. And one of the hardest things to do when we're talking about information protection and deletion and retention of documents is to make sure that people understand that the two labels do not connect to each other. So how does it all fit together? What is it that we can do to try and bring all of this together into one holistic profile that allows us to manage it all, ideally in one place? Of course, Microsoft portals, while they are coming together, they're not actually there yet. So within the platform, within what we're doing, we have a number of discrete areas that we can look at. Identity and access management we've been talking about for years. The fact that we are using the identity as the clear platform and the plane on which we can control access. We need to understand threat protection to make sure that we know that that user is coming from a known, good, clean environment, or if they're not, that we understand what that risk is. Information protection, which is what we're specifically talking about now, making sure that documents do not leak. The ingress and egress of those documents is maintained so we know where things are. We maintain the security of that environment. We make sure that we are aware when things are potentially going wrong. And then we make sure that we're also compliant, making sure that we are adhering to GDPR or PCI or whatever other regulatory compliance that we have to do. Now, if we look at these a little bit more closely, ignoring identity, because as I've said, we've talked about that enough, then we can be in a position where we are looking for the threats using either Exchange Online Protection or the Office 365 Defender, and making sure that that intelligence that's held in the security graph is being used to maintain as high a posture as possible for the security. Making sure, using information protection, that highly classified documents are not being sent out over email, are not being uploaded to Box or Dropbox or other data stores. Making sure that we can see when things are being labeled, when that intellectual property or PII enclosed within document is being labeled correctly, making sure that it's not being stored in inappropriate locations. Then making sure that we can show all of the instances of PII that relate to a specific person through e-discovery, making sure that we are maintaining our compliance regime, that files are being monitored in the right way, are being cleaned up in the right way, are being deleted or not deleted as is appropriate for those specific files. One of the things we need to bear in mind with this, though, is that we understand what we've got. File storage has been around for a very long time. It used to be that we could only ever store a file on the local hard 10 megabyte disk on a PC. Well, that's no longer true. Organizations have petabytes of information spread across file servers on multiple locations. Quite often we're using NAS or SAN storage to actually bulk this up. Files are in SharePoint, files are in Teams, in document libraries, in OneDrive, and it's very difficult to stop a user actually putting something on a local disk on their laptop or mobile device unless we take control. How old are these files? How often are they used? Have they fallen out of use over time, and could they be cleaned up? What's in those files? Is it important? Do we need to keep it? And how do you know? When we look at this, we need to understand and detect where our sensitive data is. And by sensitive, we're not just talking about PII, we're talking about that whole range. Project codes that we can identify, NI numbers, bank account details, contract details, however it might be. And we need to understand where that is, either on its device, whether it's stored in the cloud, or whether it's on premises. Once we've detected that data, we then need to classify it, apply the sensitivity labels that go with it, potentially add on the protection, making sure that the file, if it's protected, is only available to the people who should be opening it. And then we need to monitor this. We need to report on when classified files are being sent out of the organization through any medium, whether that be stored to a USB stick or added to a box or a Dropbox account. And we can do all of this using a variety of tools. So we can scan quite easily any of the files that we have in our network by utilizing the AIP Scanner. When I say quite easily, it's a relatively easy thing to configure. We may need more than one scanner. For organizations that have multiple locations with multiple file stores and a large number of files, having 2, 3, 4, 5 or more scanners is useful. Keep the scanner next to where the data is. So 1 per data center, 2 per data center. With data that's on devices, we need to be using things like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint to ensure that those classifications of files, those sensitive files, are only stored in the appropriate location. We can then use applications like the Microsoft Cloud Application Security, the MCAS product, to validate that those sensitive files are not being stored in SharePoint locations which are open to users across the internet. Generally speaking, what we've been talking about are unstructured data files. Structured data, so data that's sitting inside your SQL servers, your databases, things where the actual control of access is pretty much part of the SQL service itself, also need to be monitored. And that's where the PerView environment comes in. And PerView, which is in preview at the moment, allows us to manage and govern data which is held in these structured data files. They can exist on multiple clouds, they can exist as data inside SaaS applications. And we can monitor those, whether that's in Azure, Blob, Cosmos, Oracle databases, Hive metastores, Teradata systems, Power BI, whether it's data inside SAP or whether it's in the Amazon S3 cloud. PerView can touch all of these, and using the connectors can actually help you to identify where that data is and what it is. Once we understand what the data is, then we can start to think about how we make sure it stays where we want it. And the data loss prevention controls allow us to examine what's inside Office 365, potentially what's outside Office 365, and actually control where it goes, whether that's transiting through email or whether it's through browsers. And we can control this based on specific policies. So we can create a policy that deals with email, a different policy that deals with SharePoint, a different one for OneDrive, another one for Teams. Or we could have one policy that controls all of these things if we can define that policy well enough. There are lots of information types we can use to help define this policy: financial, regulatory approval, and you can also create your own. If you have a standard way of defining a contract number or a work order number or something else that you put into these intellectual property documents, then those can be created and added to the information types so that you can monitor things on your own. Now, there's lots of information types that are available. Some of them are defined by regulation, whether that's GDPR or PCI or HIPAA. And Microsoft do their best to make sure that those information types are predefined for you. But there are currently 204 information types that have been defined. Yes, they are all on this one slide, and yes, it does make it very difficult to read. But it's also very easy to find. It's a simple URL that you can just click on or enter or follow, which will give you that worldwide view of all of the information types. You can narrow that down and go for just EU or just UK or just US and see just the ones that are appropriate. From the UK point of view, we have things like driver's license number, electoral roll number, national health number, NINO for national insurance, taxpayer reference. So they're all there and available for us to use as part of our regulatory compliance and as part of our policies. But once we've identified these files and we've identified that there is sensitive information in there that shouldn't be seen outside of the organization, then we may want to add in file protection. File protection means taking the content of a Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or email and encrypting it, making sure that the key to unlock that encryption is only available to specific users. That means the protection that we're using travels with the file. We can then apply a guest list, people who may be able to gain access to that file outside, and we can give them explicitly rights to do that, whether that's to view or print, review, author, or own. And we define this guest list, if you will, by using email addresses. We can, if we want, use an email domain. So you could make a document available to thirdspace.net if that was what you chose to do. I tend to think of this as a bouncer. In order for you to get into the nightclub, your name needs to be on the list. If your name's not on the list, you can't come in. If your name is on the list, you may be given explicit access to something else. So, yes, your name's on the list, you can go to the VIP floor, or your name's on the list, but you can't go to the VIP floor. And the same is true of having access to these controls within a file to allow you to view, review, author, or own the file. So how does it work? Well, when we apply protection, it's done automatically with the label. So here's a little screenshot of my copy of Word where I have gone into a file and I've clicked on my demonstration button. And the demonstration label has then been assigned explicitly to this file. We've added some visual marking. You can see that there's a header on the file, just on the right-hand side where it says protected. We can see from the AIP bar that this has been given a demonstration label and the tag has gone red. If I click on the View Permissions button at the top, then I can see what I'm allowed to do within this document. Now, it's my document. I own it, so I should have full permissions. And indeed, that's what this shows me. I have the ability to view the document, edit it, copy, that means copy and paste in and out of the document. I can print it, I can save it somewhere else, I can export the data, I can use macros to access it. I have full control. But I can set this up explicitly for a distribution group or an email address so that that email address can view the document and print it, but can't edit. I could then send a document off to a printers in order for them to print 5,000 copies. They wouldn't be able to edit it, they wouldn't be able to change things, but they will be able to see what's going on. When somebody applies a sensitivity label to an email, that can actually make sure that data loss prevention policies kick in and automatically encrypt that email on its way out. So we don't have to manually do it. But if we wanted to, we can actually encrypt from the user. So the user can actually say they would like some detail on a file to be encrypted. Now, examples of where we'd use this would be sending an ID and a password to a manager to pass on to a member of staff who's starting tomorrow. We don't want that ID and password to be available to anybody else, so we could include an encrypt option. Now, the encrypt only doesn't stop the user from forwarding it, but it might stop the actual end user from reading it. The do not forward option, however, does encryption and also ensures the target, the person who this email is addressed to, cannot pass it on to anybody else. So we're mitigating the risk of that data being passed forward. Now, if they've got Outlook, if they've got an Exchange, whether it's on premises or online, do not forward works really well. But it also works with things like Gmail. When we send a do not forward email to somebody who's running in a Google environment, they will actually see an email arrive. That email will tell them that they have been sent a secure email and they need to click on a link to receive it. Yes, this does potentially fall foul of phishing policies, but if you're expecting an email with a link and that's how we tell people it's coming, then it's actually something that is quite permissible. When the user clicks the link, they are asked to identify themselves using an email address, the one that they sent the email to, and then a one-time password. And that one-time password is sent automatically to the same email address that the original email went to. The user then enters that and they end up in Outlook Web Access, able to read the email, able to see any attachments that go with it, but that email has never left your control. So it's a really, really good way of identifying and being able to prove that that email and the information with it has only gone to one person. So once we've got this all in place, once we've got the sensitivity labeling sorted out and we know where things are, well, then we need to start reporting on this to be able to prove compliance. And as I said, the first thing we need to do is detect what data we have and where it is. So AIP reporting has been available inside the Azure blades for as long as AIP and reporting have been around. So it's been a while. This report, the one that's on the screen at the moment, is actually showing information that's been discovered by the AIP scanner. And we can see there's a number of things that have popped up. We've got phone numbers, we've got credit card data, and we can drill down into this and actually see where that data is. We can see what it relates to, and we can start to see, if we want, where those files are and what those files are. We can use this to help determine whether or not we need to do any cleaning up beforehand. We can also ask the AIP scanner to assign a label to all of these files automatically. Now that could be by location, or it could be by the content of the file. So anywhere you see a credit card number, you would apply a classified or confidential or other sensitivity label that's appropriate for what you're doing. One thing that the AIP scanner will also do is not change the date and time of the file stamp. So we're not making sure that people can see that the file has been accessed recently and therefore not delete it. The date and time of the last file access would not actually be changed. And that's using some of the functionality that's built into the MIP development kit. Once we've started on this journey and we've got things in place, then we can start to assess where we are with compliance. The Compliance Center allows us to run assessments against the data sets that we have inside Office 365, whether that be for PCI or GDPR or something else. And we can have multiple assessments running at the same time, depending on what we want to see. And you can see here that I've got two assessments on the go. One against GDPR, which really hasn't been started, but has still managed to do a 20% assessment progress, which is very strange. And one which is still running, on data protection baseline for the whole of the Microsoft 365 environment. We can create these assessments and monitor each of them individually. So here's the detail behind that GDPR assessment. We can see that it's 20% through. It has assigned a fair number of points, which is in effect achievements against the policy. And we can also see potentially where things are failing because of medium risk or high risk. Now, when we create these assessments, we need to do it based on the regulatory approvals that we need to pass. And we can use templates for this, and there are a set of templates that Microsoft make available. They also maintain these templates on a regular basis. So as new regulation comes out or changes to regulation take place, Microsoft will update the template in line with those changes in regulation. This makes the whole environment much, much easier to manage, because instead of having to monitor all of the regulations yourself and update your policies, the templates will do that for you. The templates are split into two discrete patterns: included templates, which you can run against your environment anytime you like. And that includes ISO 27001 and GDPR. So maintaining your compliance assessment for those is free and is available inside M365 straight away. There are also premium templates that are available to you, and these deal with more complex areas. If there is a template available for you that you would like to use and you want to understand that assessment, then you can add these premium templates on as part of a license. Once you've actually got to that stage, then you can start to see how compliant you are. And the compliance score is achieved in a similar way to the secure score. So it's monitoring your current status against best practice as understood by M365. And that compliance score is then visible, and you can report on that as part of your annual regime of reporting back to the people who are monitoring you and auditing you. There are also suggested actions in here for improving your compliance score. And that could be something as simple as making sure you have a DLP policy in place that blocks the transmission of confidential files, or that blocks the download of files to non-standard devices. One of the things that we do need to be aware of, though, when we're talking about data loss is the insider risk. Today, users of a modern workplace can create, manage, share data almost anywhere. We can access data on iPhones, Android phones, tablets, iPads, Windows devices, Chrome devices, Chromebooks. You can even run an Xbox Series X browser and get to SharePoint and view data. And that tends to be something that's very, very complex to manage. It's also very difficult to stop somebody inside the company from reading files, from taking copies of files. And it could be that they're going to use them properly as part of their day-to-day work, but they could also be taking those files and trying to use them when they get their next job and taking that intellectual property away from your business. In order to maintain that, there are a set of policies that Microsoft make available which monitor what your users are doing. Now, when we say monitor what they're doing, we're not in effect putting a spy in the sky on the device to monitor every keystroke. But what we are monitoring are whether or not they've suddenly started downloading a lot of files, which they wouldn't do normally, or whether they're pushing files up to Box and Dropbox using a personal account rather than a corporate account. So the policies that are available include things like data theft from users who have already been identified as leaving, general data leaks, things that are getting out by mistake, priority users, whether they're doing things that you wouldn't expect them to do, and so on. There's obviously quite a few things here. You don't have to stick purely with the Microsoft policy. You can use it as a baseline, and you can extend that baseline to increase or decrease the relevant posture depending on the people that you have available to you. And it's your own policies that will create the alerts. And when you have the alert, you can then start to take action against it. So once the policy has defined that something is going wrong and raised an alert, you then pass that on to the security team, the HR team, the compliance team, who will triage it, check to make sure that things are working in the optimum way, that people aren't behaving in a way that you wouldn't want them to, investigate it, and then take the appropriate action, whether that actually is any action at all, because it could be something that somebody is doing as part of their job. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you've got any questions that you would like to go through in more detail with us, please contact us. The email address is the standard one. We've got the telephone number you can use, and we'll be more than happy to help you out with an envisioning session or to go through your requirements in detail and help you out.